a brand is really a meaning system. It really is a way to communicate to a group of people, a marketplace. These are my values, and this is what I stand for. This is my mission. And so branding has a much deeper kind of impact, and hopefully the smart organizations, services, companies, etc., understand that distinction, and they're working very hard to make sure that what they believe they stand for is what the marketplace actually perceives.
Welcome to a special edition of The Ripple Effect. I'm Dan Loney. In honor of Juneteenth this month, Senior Advisor to the Dean for the Coalition of Equity and Opportunity, Kenneth Shropshire, will be your special guest host. In each episode this month, Ken and Wharton faculty are focusing on the critical themes of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll be covering a diverse range of topics, bringing you the latest insights and knowledge that you could apply to your life and work. So get ready to dive into this special edition of The Ripple Effect with guest host Ken Shropshire. So the topic we're talking about today with Americus kind of links us back in to what companies are doing around diversity, equity, inclusion. You're seeing a little bit firsthand as well. Give us your thoughts on how companies are reacting to this issue.
Well, part of what we're looking at is how they reacted initially post George Floyd, kind of that moment, compared to where we are now. And I think that's where we all need to step back and think about our companies still doing what they need to do or what they said they were going to do, and evaluate the circumstances as they stand.
Well, I will let you two get at it. A pleasure to have on the show Americus Reed, marketing professor here at the Wharton School. Americus, always great to talk to you, my friend.
Great to see you as well, Dan. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Gentlemen, enjoy your time.
Thanks, Dan. Americus, I'm happy to be doing this. One of my longtime friends at Wharton. Thanks for being here, man.
I appreciate you. Yeah, thanks a lot, Ken. As one of my key mentors, always a pleasure to sit down and have a conversation with you because I walk away a little bit smarter. So I'm excited to have that experience as well today.
That's a marketing thing, how to tell even in the private conversations. but Americus, you and I talk about these issues a lot. I mean, partly as being two of the senior African American leaders in the school and on campus as well. And, one of the things that I want to highlight to folks is that you are a branding expert and you are not a race branding expert. And so this is a conversation that talks about what you know best, branding, and as applied to this topic. What's the importance of branding for a company overall, just before we get into this?
Well, I love that question. Thanks for that, Ken. I think it's important because if you step back, you think about what is branding and how does it fit into the overall context of the organization. It's huge because in some senses, we think about branding and we're sometimes fooled because we think it's a picture, it's a tagline, it's a logo. And certainly brands have external markers that communicate to the world, this is where we are and how you can find us.
Right.
But if you step back and you think about it a little bit more generally, Ken, a brand is really a meaning system. It really is a way to communicate to a group of people, a marketplace. These are my values, and this is what I stand for. This is my mission. And so branding has a much deeper kind of impact, and hopefully the smart organizations, services, companies, etc., understand that distinction, and they're working very hard to make sure that what they believe they stand for is what the marketplace actually perceives.
Right. So that gets us into this context, into the race of the workplace context that we're talking about in this series. And, at post George Floyd, there's just a new study from McKinsey that says the companies have committed to, now it's up to $340 billion, which is an unbelievable number, to these issues related to equity and opportunity broadly. And 141 billion of that has been committed just in the past year. So, there's apparently still a lot of work to be done. But how are companies, in terms of branding, how are they utilizing this moment and the announcement of these funds? What needs to go hand in hand with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ken. I think what's really, really important and is an aspect that is sometimes missed is the idea that as we try to communicate a connection to a marketplace and an understanding of how internally we are as an organization changing to become better, right, or to be better citizens, what needs to be done. And I think the money piece is super important to your point. But what's equally important is the understanding of once we create diversity, once we create inclusion, once we create a kind of composition within the organization, that we're actively trying to manage that in a way that allows that inclusion, that change in the organization to actually be successful. So it's a really serious mistake if you just create diversity and you try to walk away and think it's going to happen and facilitate if all the efficiencies, all of the positive things on its own. Because the organization, the individuals the employees, the people, they have to understand how to reconnect and reintegrate with new perspectives. And sometimes that requires difficult conversations. It requires uncomfortable situations because you have a new context that people are expected to thrive as an employee in. And you just can't pretend that that's going to happen all on its own. There also has to be some oversight and some purposeful consideration with respect to how to manage that diversity as well. So I think companies are awake to that now, and that they understand that it's not just only being self-aware, but it's also understanding that we have to work very hard to manage this new world that we want to try to see in the vision of our future.
So externally, you can get a branding bump, I guess you call it, by announcing the money, by announcing programs. But you're saying there's much to be impactful, to truly make this work. The work continues once you make that announcement in a way that maybe some companies haven't contemplated.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that the understanding that the work is just starting. It's a great point you just make. Once you start making those important initial efforts to create, now we have to also understand that's the easy part.
Right.
The hard part is, how do we now manage this appropriately? How do we make this part of the DNA? How do we bring people together in this new world that they haven't been in perhaps before? And how do we make them thrive and be successful in that new setting?
Right. So I guess the question is then how do you, any examples you can give, or maybe it is just top-down thinking, how do you sustain this? So once you announce the money, you announce the program, how do you make that I guess it's certainly from your kind of bailiwick, as we would say, how do you sustain that brand? What do you need to do to make it last longer than that moment? And this is some of your language too, and be genuine and authentic at the same time.
Yeah, that's the huge
trick.
part. That's the difficult part. And I think a couple things have to happen, Ken. First, you've already alluded to this. You have to have kind of top down, full on, full committed support to this. In other words, this ethos has to live and breathe and be incredibly robust in the C-suite. And then once that ethos is there has to be the work that's being done to permeate it through the entire various levels and layers of the organization. So it's kind of like, it's two parts. One part is the authenticity piece comes from those individuals in the C-suite, making sure that this is a living, breathing thing that happens and is reinforced every single day in every aspect of the daily tasks that have to occur in terms of the organization running efficiently. And a second part of that is everyone within the organization being aware of what they need to now do to make that vision, that ethos real. And so part of it is to make sure that it's kind of flowing through the organizations from the top down, but also the bottom up. And that there's a clear shared collective understanding that this approach is something that we all believe in, and that we're going to work every day to becoming a successful, aspect that we want to build as part of our brand, if we want to reach that level of authenticity that you were describing earlier.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, as I'm sitting in my marketing classroom today, the external part is one thing, but there's really a lot going on internally that makes this important, that makes the branding impactful. You're saying that a lot of the conversation that needs to be contemplated is not the press release that you send out to the public. It's what you do inside the company.
That's 100% correct. If you think about it, and I've seen this happen in many different situations, Ken, where companies will show up and say, "Here's the new brand,"
Right.
and then they kind of walk away and they say, "Okay, we expect everyone to now be empowered to embrace this." And the problem with that, Ken, is there were no degrees of freedom for people to own it. There was no opportunity for people to say, I collaborate, I'm part of this. And so in those situations where it just shows up, it tends to fall flat because there was no groundswell where people felt like they were actually a part of this movement towards this change that we're trying to see happen. And so the smart companies understand before they even do this, the press release, they're working in the background to make sure that everyone in the organization is understanding that we're going to be a co-collaborative effort here, and we're going to do this together. And there are going to be moments of pivoting, moments of changing, moments of modification, mistakes, missteps. We understand that this is an evolution, it's a process, but we want to make sure that we bring the company and all of its constituent parts, all of its employees, we want to bring them along with us so that they feel they're a part of this and that they have some psychological ownership in it.
So we're talking about this companies that got on board, I think, in some way post George Floyd. What about companies that missed the moment, I guess, that are looking around and realizing we didn't do this, we need to get on board? Is it too late? What missteps could be made if you do try to jump in and do some work in the DEI space or in the wealth gap space, or should you just continue to lay low? I mean, what advice do you give companies that are saying, okay, that maybe, to use the language, maybe they just woke up? What should they do?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a hard question to answer, Ken, because one can make a philosophical argument that getting on the ship late is better than not getting on at all. One can make that argument for sure.
Right.
But I think the marketplace, there is a kind of settling point where the marketplace will, if you wait too long, or if you're perceived as kind of going along because of social pressures or of a herd mentality or whatever, that obviously is going to decrease your ability to do it in a way that's authentically perceived as something genuine, and so on and so forth. So I think, but even those companies just have a decision to make, because even if you're going to jump in late, here's my rule that I always tell companies: you can't half do this. This is not something where you can sort of say, well, we think it's important, but we don't want to offend some people, so we're going to try to thread this needle, and we're going to try to use kind of really safe, ambiguous language so everyone's happy. And like this group's over here, no one gets offended. You can't do it that way. You have to literally say, this is something that the C-suite, the company, the ethos, the brand, what we stand for, we believe in this, and we are going to move forward with this and create this, and we're going to stand behind those core values. And I think this idea of committing fully and living with the consequences of whatever that might mean, because there may be groups of consumers, there may be target markets that feel that they no longer can connect with you because of this type of stance that you're taking. But that's the whole point of purpose marketing. That's the whole point of creating a strong stance on an issue, whether it be social justice, wealth gaps, the other kinds of things that you were mentioning, to explicitly step out there and say, this is what we stand for. This is something you have to do explicitly, directly, clearly, and articulately. So
when we think broadly about this, the branding issue related to DEI issues in the workplace, one of the things that I always come back to, especially being involved in sports so much, is the idea of what to do when something goes wrong, and not, we'll call it external, not like the George Floyd kind of moment, but with your company, for example, the senior executive says the N-word, or there's a sexual harassment case that's brought against a high-profile individual in your organization. These are one-off moments where these companies may have something like the post-George Floyd activities going on. What is it the company should do when these moments, and I know each one is different. I mean, and I know we have to individualize what happens. But in sports, the tradition has been, you say the N-word, you're going to be fired the next day. And there's a variety of follow-up kinds of things have happened. What's your kind of thinking about this when you see these crisis moments happen in this space where we're concerned about DEI and race in the workplace, and companies that want to have the right brand after something occurs? what kinds of steps do you contemplate in terms of regrouping when those things occur?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Ken. I think that there's a couple of things that I believe are really important. And I think the research on this is quite clear. And that's the idea that, first of all, it's interesting because crises around DEI, situations of race, situations where we're trying to create more diverse components within our organizations, they're going to happen. So the idea is, how do we respond to those crises? And I think that's implicit in your point as you asked that question, Ken. And I think there's a couple of things that are really important. The first thing is that you always have to jump out there in these situations and be quick to validate the concerns of those who are offended, right? So language that has to do with, well, I'm sorry I offended you, things like that, that's the wrong language. The language is to just come out, own it, and say, hey, mea culpa, I made a mistake around this particular issue. There may be some racial tension going on with respect to how my company fits into a context, or leaders in my company are engaging around issues around DEI, but you got to come out and own it quickly and validate those concerns of individuals who may be and other constituents who might be offended
Right.
by that. That's point number one. Point number two is to say, listen, I got to show you an action plan. So I think that's the second step of basically saying, here's what we're going to do in this context of what happened in this particular crisis. We have this 4-point plan, and here it is.
Okay.
And then lastly, Ken, you think about steps 1 and 2 that I just mentioned, and being very proactive about controlling that narrative and getting out there and talking to people so that they understand your position and your plan moving forward about that particular DEI or race-related crisis that might happen in your organization. So if you follow those 3 steps, you can mitigate the negative potential reaction that could happen. The worst thing you could do is stay silent and allow maybe your rivals, your arch enemies, to fill that silence. So, that's something that I think about with respect to companies. I'll also just quickly add this, Ken. If you've been doing the work, this is what you said earlier. If you've been doing the diligent, purposeful work around these issues of DEI and race, and your historical footprint is out there, you have a surplus of goodwill in the bank that you can draw upon when these crises happen, such that when you go out there now, it's not like the marketplace is looking at you like, man, those evil bastards. No, they're saying like, you know what? If I look at what they've done over the past, they have an authentic, connection with these DEI racial related issues. And so therefore, I'm going to take that into consideration when I evaluate their response to a particular crisis.
Then there's some real genuineness to, that's not who we are. And again, as I mentioned, this is so common in sports, and we have to let this person go because they're not part of our ethos. The other path that we're talking about in some of these conversations is the idea of what else can you do to rehab someone or to get someone in the right frame of mind. And there's a lot of research now from some of our faculty about the idea of diversity training and that sort of thing, which may have a good PR value, but it's not necessarily as impactful in terms of having a real impact on people as some have contemplated. So that's great. I mean, I love those 3 steps. I mean, I think that's so much more, and something for companies to be able to contemplate in advance, as you say, in this longer kind of planning. If you are really about DEI, if you really are about addressing issues of race in the workplace, you should have these kinds of plans in place. And I think related to that, the other question that I wanted to ask you before we begin to close out is, what should companies do? And I hate to frame it like this, but I think it does capture the question, when the next George Floyd moment occurs.
Oh, that's a great question, Ken. Yeah, I think that.
It is kind of going back to the beginning. Should you issue these statements again? Should you say we're going to commit this money again? Has that proven to be a good path? I mean, have some companies done it right, or is there some other path that you see that they might begin to contemplate? And companies, this would cost you a lot of money in real life to get this advice from Americus.
No, you ask a very challenging question, Ken. I think that, from my perspective, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier that I want to unpack just a little bit is the context of what gets done with that money. And, a big part of the efficacy around this, and the research bears this out as well, is the idea that you have to take these efforts and you have to create interventions that the company and the community are co-involved with. So it can't just be, let's hire the celebrity to come in and put a beautiful, glossed over, training manual. Here's the training manual. Starbucks, let's shut down for a day and do a whole day of training on all the stores, and we'll have Common come in and he'll be on the video, and yeah, that's great. But at the end of the day, you also need what's going on in the community. Like, what are we doing to be a part of that conversation, to be a trusted advisor in the community, doing things to help the community understand where we are with this issue and how we're helping the actual community, not just through them buying our stuff, but authentically, investing in these communities that would allow the probabilistic likelihood that maybe we can be a part of reducing these types of incidences from happening in the first place. So it's a really a full 360-degree approach where, yes, we want to do the internal work that gets the PR bump up and gets covered in the media and gets us that earned media, but we also want to be working very, very closely with the community activists, the boots on the ground, if you will, the folks that are fighting these issues in the absence of the light of gratitude from any audience, and be a part of that effort and that work, and putting money into those kinds of areas as well to, again, build it up not only from top down, but also the employees, the layers, but also the community as well. So I think that, you're not going to stop potentially these types of things from happening, but you always want to be in a proactive mode of investing in the community and being a part of that solution, such that these types of unfortunate incidences don't happen in the first place. I think that's the best that you can do, and that you have to kind of do that from an authentic and a genuine place, as you just mentioned.
Americus, I love these insights. The idea of being on top of branding before the trouble starts, how to address issues when they do come, how to be on high alert that any moment might be a branding moment. And especially insightful to me was the idea of, it's not just the external message, it's what you do internally as well. How is it that you get your people on board? Americus Reed, thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. Always great to talk with you, Ken.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.